There was no warning. There were no signs in the sky or anticipated screams, only the sound of rain, incessant, hitting the dry savanna ground like thousands of drums that never stopped playing. And in the middle of that deluge, a smell, the smell of death coming from the east, carried by the wind dragging the storm, a smell the dogs knew, a smell that made their muscles tense and their fangs expose without anyone ordering them. It was the smell of hyenas, but not 5, not 10. The smell was so thick, so concentrated, that Daniel Correa, standing on the porch of his house in the small village of Loita Hills in southern Kenya, knew immediately this was different. Different from anything he'd faced in his 53 years living on this land. The rain had started 3 days earlier. It wasn't the gentle rain that refreshes and gives life. It was violent rain that tears off thatched roofs, that turns roads into rivers of mud, that isolates entire villages from the outside world. Communications had been cut the second day. Roads were impassable. The village of Loita Hills, with its 120 inhabitants, was completely alone, and the hyenas knew it. Daniel looked toward the pens where 40 goats and 20 sheep slept, the sustenance of the entire village. Without them, without that meat and that milk, the children would go hungry. Families would leave, the village would die, and the hyenas were coming for them. But Daniel Correa wasn't a man who gave up without a fight. He'd grown up on this land. His father had defended this same place against lions in the 70s. His grandfather had fought against poachers in the 50s. Maasai blood ran in his veins, mixed with the Kikuyu determination of his mother. And he had something his ancestors never had. He had 10 DOGO Argentinos, not ordinary dogs, white warriors, 10 males, each weighing between 45 and 50 kilos of pure muscle, bred specifically to hunt wild boar and pumas in the mountains of Argentina, brought to Kenya 5 years ago by an Argentine rancher who had fallen in love with this land and decided to help local communities protect themselves. When the rancher died of malaria 2 years ago, he left the dogs in Daniel's care with a single instruction: use them to protect what matters. And tonight, that was exactly what Daniel would do. The 10 dogos stood under the covered porch, watching the rain with an intensity that made the air feel electric. Pure white, all of them, like muscular ghosts that gleamed even in darkness. Their names were a mix of Spanish and Swahili, honoring their 2 worlds. The leader, Trueno, was 7 years old and had a scar crossing his chest from a fight with a leopard 3 years ago. The leopard had lost. Next to Trueno was Simba, 6 years old, second in command, with jaws so powerful he'd once crushed an adult hyena's femur with a single bite. Relampago and Tormenta, 5-year-old brothers, inseparable, who fought like a single entity with 2 bodies. Volcan, 4 years old, the most aggressive, with contained fury that only released in battle. Roca, 5 years old, the heaviest at 52 kilos, immovable as his name until he attacked. Viento and Sombra, both 4 years old, the fastest natural scouts. And the 2 youngest, Fuego and Hielo, 3 years old, with opposite names but identical hearts, willing to die for the pack. The first hyena appeared at 9:47 at night. She didn't walk toward the village. She crawled, like a shadow sliding under doors. Daniel saw her from the window, solitary, scout, measuring defenses, smelling fear. Trueno saw her too. He didn't bark. Dogo Argentinos don't bark unnecessarily. They only watch. They wait. They calculate. The scout hyena approached the goat pen. The goat smelled her and began to stir. The hyena didn't attack. She only looked. She studied the fence, the entrances, the weak points. Daniel knew what this meant. This wasn't a solitary hyena hunting. She was a scout, part of a clan. And if there was a scout, the pack would come soon. He went out to the porch despite the rain falling like whips. He was soaked in seconds. He shouted toward the hyena, waving his arms. The animal turned. She looked at him, and Daniel saw something in those eyes that chilled his blood more than any cold. He didn't see fear. He saw evaluation, as if the hyena was measuring how much effort it would take to kill him. Then the hyena laughed, that characteristic laugh that sounds like demented human laughter, and she left, walking slowly, without hurry, because she knew she'd return with reinforcements, and then there would be no more evaluations, only death. Daniel ran to the house of the village chief, Joseph Ntare. He pounded on the door hard. Joseph opened it, a 60-year-old man with hands that had worked this land for decades. Daniel told him what he'd seen. Joseph didn't hesitate. He woke the other men of the village, 20 total, ages between 16 and 65. Each grabbed what they had: machetes, sticks, 3 old rifles with limited ammunition. Daniel had his Winchester rifle with 12 bullets. It wouldn't be enough if a complete clan came, but it would have to be. They organized a defense. 10 men would surround the main pen. 5 would cover the school where children had been evacuated along with the women. 5 more would protect the water well, the village's most vital resource. Daniel and his 10 dogos would patrol the perimeter. They waited. The rain continued, relentless, turning the ground into ankle-deep mud, reducing visibility to 20 meters, creating constant noise that drowned out other sounds. Perfect hunting conditions for predators that didn't depend only on sight, but on smell and hearing. At 10:32 at night, they arrived. There weren't 5, there weren't 10, there weren't 20. When Daniel finally managed to count them in the occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the savannah, he felt his stomach sink. There weren't 30. There weren't 40. There were 60 spotted hyenas, each weighing between 50 and 80 kilos. 120 eyes gleaming yellow under the rain. 60 mouths with jaws that could generate 1,100 pounds of pressure per square inch. More than a lion, more than a tiger, enough to crush elephant bones. The Ngora clan, the largest and most aggressive in the Narok district, led by a matriarch called Zuri, a giant female weighing 82 kilos who had killed 2 male lions in her life and had led this clan for 9 years, and they were coming for everything, not just for the goats, for territory, for domination, to send a message. The hyenas didn't attack immediately, they organized. With intelligence many humans underestimate. They divided into 4 groups, 15 to the north, 15 to the south, 20 to the east, 10 to the west, covering the retreat. It was a perfect military formation. Daniel saw it all from his elevated position on the roof of the village's tallest building, a 2-story warehouse. He shouted warnings. The men positioned themselves. The Dogos distributed. Trueno took the north with Simba, Volcan and Roca. Relampago and Tormenta the south with Viento and Sombra. Fuego and Hielo stayed in the center as quick reserve. The matriarch Zuri didn't participate directly. True leaders never do at first. She stayed back, watching, directing with vocalizations that sounded like orders, and her soldiers obeyed. The first attack came from the north. 15 hyenas launched in unison toward the pen, not running chaotically, marching, in formation. The 4 northern dogos met them 10 meters from the fence. The collision was like physical thunder. Trueno hit the first hyena with such force that both rolled in the mud. His fangs found the animal's neck. He squeezed. The hyena shrieked, a horrible sound that cut even above the rain. Simba faced 2 hyenas simultaneously. He didn't retreat. He advanced. A DOGO Argentino's jaws are different from most dogs. They're designed to catch and hold, for large prey, for 100-kilo wild boars, for pumas that can kill humans. 2 60-kilo hyenas were nothing Simba couldn't handle. He bit one on the front leg. The bone crunched. The hyena fell. Volcan, with his legendary aggression, launched himself at the group. He didn't attack one. He attacked the very concept of threat. He bit, he shook, he threw. The hyenas retreated before this pure violence, but they were 15 against 4. Math would inevitably impose itself. One hyena managed to get past the defensive line. She ran toward the goats. She jumped the fence. The goats went crazy. Daniel fired from the roof. The bullet hit the hyena in the shoulder. It didn't kill her, but stopped her. The animal howled and fled limping. The southern attack came 30 seconds later. 8 hyenas, with 7 more waiting a second wave. Relampago and Tormenta, the inseparable brothers, met them with synchronization that only comes from fighting together for years. When Relampago bit, Tormenta defended. When Tormenta advanced, Relampago covered. They were a perfect 2-part machine. Viento and Sombra used their speed, flanking, cutting escape routes, forcing hyenas toward the center where the brothers waited. But the hyenas were also intelligent. The second wave didn't attack where expected. They circled. They went for the west flank where only 2 older men held sticks. Daniel saw it too late. He shouted a warning. Fuego and Hielo, the 2 3-year-olds, heard and ran. They tore through the mud like white missiles. They arrived just as the 7 hyenas were meters from the 2 men. Fuego hit the first hyena, Hielo the second. The 2 men retreated, waving their sticks. They'd have no chance in direct combat, but with the 2 dogos there, the hyenas hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. More men arrived, 5 with machetes. The hyenas reassessed. 7 against 2 dogos and 7 armed humans. The cost would be high. They retreated, for now. Zuri, the matriarch, watched from the distance. Her ears moved constantly, catching sounds Daniel couldn't hear above the rain. She saw her hyenas being repelled, that the white dogs were more formidable than anticipated, so she changed strategy. She gave a vocalization. A specific sound Daniel had heard only once before, years ago, when he witnessed a clan bring down an adult buffalo. It was the order for total attack. All 60 hyenas moved at the same time, not in groups, like a wave, a solid mass of bodies converging from all directions. Daniel fired. A hyena fell, 11 bullets remaining. Joseph fired from another position. He missed in the rain. The Dogos faced the wave, 10 against 60. The math was impossible, but Dogo Argentinos were bred for impossible. They were created in Argentina in the 1920s specifically to hunt animals larger than them, to fight outnumbered, to never retreat. Trueno, the leader, didn't try to stop the whole wave. He identified the largest hyena in the northern group, a 75-kilo male, probably one of Zuri's lieutenants. He launched straight at him. He ignored the other hyenas. He ignored bites on his flanks. He only had eyes for the lieutenant, because he knew if he killed the leader, the followers would hesitate. His jaws found the lieutenant's neck. The hyena was heavier, but Trueno had something weight can't buy. He had technique. He had years of experience. He'd killed a leopard. A large hyena was just another fight. Volcan fought beside him, covered in mud and blood. Impossible to distinguish what was what. His fury was constant, inexhaustible. Each hyena that approached was met with fangs and roars that didn't sound canine, but primordial. Roca, the heaviest at 52 kilos, was a living wall. He positioned himself in front of 3 hyenas trying to flank. He didn't move. The hyenas hit him. Roca staggered but didn't fall, and when he counterattacked, it was with force that sent a hyena flying 2 meters. In the south, Relampago was wounded. A deep bite on his back leg bled heavily, but he kept fighting. Tormenta, seeing his brother wounded, positioned himself in front of him, protecting, willing to receive attacks Relampago could no longer dodge. Viento and Sombra ran around the perimeter, not fighting in one place, but attacking, retreating, attacking again at another point, causing confusion, making hyenas constantly turn, breaking their coordination. Fuego and Hielo, the youngest, fought with desperation that compensated for their lack of experience. When Fuego was brought down, Hielo was there. When Hielo was surrounded, Fuego broke the circle. They learned in real time, in the worst classroom possible, the school of combat, where mistakes are paid with life. But they were learning. Daniel had exhausted 6 bullets, 6 hyenas dead or seriously wounded, 6 remaining. The other two rifles had fired their bullets. The men fought with machetes and sticks. One of them, a 19-year-old named Kipchoge, was brought down by two hyenas. He screamed. Other men ran to help him. One hit a hyena on the head with a wooden stick so hard the stick broke. The hyena released Kipchoge. The young man crawled backward, bleeding from the arm but alive. The rain continued. The mud made fighting like moving in molasses. Each step was effort. Each movement consumed energy twice as fast. The Dogos, with their white coats now completely brown with mud, began to show fatigue. Trueno had killed the lieutenant, but the cost had been high. He had bites on his neck, his back, his legs. He bled from at least 5 wounds. Volkan had lost part of an ear. Roca limped on his front leg. Relampago could barely stand on his wounded back leg. Of the 60 hyenas, 14 were dead or too wounded to continue. That left 46. Against 10 exhausted Dogos, 20 exhausted men, and 6 bullets. Zuri saw her numbers were still overwhelming. She gave another vocalization. This time it wasn't attack. It was something worse. It was coordinated hunt. The hyenas stopped attacking en masse. They separated. They began to surround, to cut escape routes, to isolate targets. That's when Daniel understood. This was no longer about the goats. This was about eliminating resistance. The hyenas planned to kill the Dogos, one by one, and then the men. And then they'd take everything. Daniel came down from the roof. He could no longer shoot from above. He needed to be on the ground. He needed to organize. He gathered the men. They formed a circle, 10 Dogos on the perimeter, 20 men in the center, a classic defensive formation. If the hyenas wanted the livestock, they'd have to go through this wall. Zuri accepted the challenge. She directed her 46 hyenas to surround the circle. They began to press, from all sides simultaneously, not attacking, just pressing, getting closer, testing, looking for weakness, and they found it. Relampago, with his wounded back leg, couldn't maintain his position. He limped. The hyenas saw it. 5 converged on him. Tormenta tried to intercept them, but there were too many. All 5 attacked Relampago at the same time. They brought him down. Trueno saw his companion fall and made a decision. He abandoned his position. He ran to Relampago. Simba saw Trueno move and followed him. Volkan, too. The 3 leaders abandoned the circle to save one, and the circle broke. The hyenas flooded the space. It was chaos. The defensive formation collapsed. Each man, each dog, now fought on their own island of violence. Daniel fired 3 times in rapid succession. 3 hyenas fell, 3 bullets remaining. He saw Kipchoge, the young man who had been brought down before, now standing over a dead hyena, machete in hand, screaming with a mix of fear and fury. He saw Joseph, the 60-year-old chief, using a stick to hit a hyena trying to bite another man. The stick broke. Joseph used the broken pieces as daggers. He drove one into the hyena's eye. The animal howled and fled. In the center of chaos, Trueno, Simba, and Volkan had reached Relampago. The 5 hyenas attacking him now faced 4 Dogos. The math had changed. Trueno killed one with a bite to the throat. Simba destroyed another's leg. Volkan, in his characteristic fury, chased the 3 remaining. The hyenas fled from him. But Relampago wasn't getting up. He was alive but couldn't fight anymore. Tormenta refused to leave his brother. He stayed beside him, defending his fallen body like a living shield. And when 4 hyenas tried to attack Relampago again, they found Tormenta. And Tormenta, fighting not for himself but for his brother, was unstoppable. He felt no pain. He felt no fear. He only felt purpose. The 4 hyenas retreated, bleeding. Tormenta remained standing over Relampago, defying the entire universe to try to pass. But the battle was tilting. The Dogos were exhausted. The men were wounded. The hyenas, though they'd lost more numbers, still had energy, still had options. Zuri gave the final order. The vocalization meaning no more tactics, only violence. Kill everyone. The hyenas attacked with renewed ferocity, as if they'd been containing something and now released it. And for the first time, Daniel felt something he'd never felt in all his years defending this land. He felt they were going to lose. But then something changed. The weather changed. The wind, which had been blowing from the east, bringing the hyenas smell, turned. It began to blow from the west. And it brought a different smell of more dogs. Daniel looked west, through the curtain of rain, and he saw something that made his heart jump. 2 figures running through the mud, dogs, but not DOGO Argentinos. They were dogs from the neighboring village, 5 kilometers away. 2 massive German shepherds, Daniel knew. Their owners must have heard the gunshots, or seen the lights, or simply felt something was wrong. And they'd sent their dogs. 2 more wouldn't change the math significantly. It was still 40 hyenas against 12 dogs and 20 men. But it changed something more important. It changed morale. The 10 dogos saw reinforcements arrive, and they roared, not barks, roars, as if saying, now they're afraid. Now they know we're not alone. Now they understand this land won't surrender. The 2 German shepherds threw themselves into combat without hesitation, without knowing these white dogs, without knowing these humans, only knowing there was a fight and they were on the same side. And the hyenas, for the first time, showed uncertainty, because reinforcement meant maybe more were coming. Maybe this wasn't an isolated group. Maybe the entire region was mobilizing. Zuri couldn't know it was only 2 more dogs. She couldn't know no more were coming. She only saw the calculation had changed. And when you're a leader, when you've maintained your position for 9 years, making correct decisions, you know when it's time to retreat. She gave the vocalization. Not of attack, of retreat. The hyenas didn't obey immediately. They were in battle frenzy, but Zuri was the matriarch. Her voice was law. Gradually, one by one, the hyenas began to retreat. The youngest first, then the wounded, finally those who still wanted to fight. Trueno took a step toward them. He didn't attack. He only showed he still could, that he still had strength. Simba and Volkan did the same. The 2 German shepherds, without understanding the context but reading body language, also advanced. And the hyenas, seeing this united front, finished retreating. Zuri was the last to leave. She stayed looking at Trueno, leader to leader, and in that silent exchange there was respect. Respect from one warrior to another. Recognition that both had fought well, that both had shown courage, that this draw, because that's what it was no dishonor to either. Then Zuri turned and walked into darkness. Her 40 hyenas followed her, leaving behind 19 bodies of their clan, some dead, others dying, but retreating, choosing to survive to hunt another day. When the last sound of the hyenas faded in the distance, silence fell, a silence deeper than before. Only the sound of rain remained. Daniel dropped his rifle. He had 3 bullets he never fired. His hands shook uncontrollably. He looked around. 3 wounded men, Kipchoge worst, but alive. The 10 dogos standing, well, 9 standing. Relampago was lying down with Tormenta still over him, but all alive. The 2 German shepherds, whose names Daniel didn't even know, sat in the mud, panting. One had a cut on his leg, the other seemed unharmed. Daniel walked toward them. He knelt, he petted them. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." The dogs looked at him with those eyes dogs have, those eyes that say you don't need to thank us, this is what we do, we protect. The following days were of recovery. Relampago survived. His leg healed, though he was left with a permanent limp. Volkan lost part of his ear, but that only made him look fiercer. Trueno had 17 wounds requiring stitches. The nearest vet was 2 days' travel. Daniel had to sew him himself, using needle and thread. Trueno didn't complain. He only looked at Daniel with eyes saying, "Continue. I'm fine. I've survived worse things." The men recovered. Kipchoge had scars he'd carry his entire life, but he also had a story he'd tell his children, a story about the night his village was attacked by 60 hyenas, and they survived, because 10 white dogs said they shall not pass, Because 20 men with machetes decided their home was worth fighting for. Because 2 dogs from a neighboring village ran through a storm because they heard others in trouble. The news spread. Journalists came from Nairobi when roads finally reopened. They wanted to interview Daniel. They wanted to photograph the dogos. Daniel allowed photos, but declined long interviews. He didn't like attention. This wasn't about fame. It was about survival, about community, about the ancient alliance between humans and dogs that exists for 15,000 years. An alliance that says, if you give me home, I'll give you my life. The hyenas didn't return to Loita Hills. The Ngora clan moved east to less defended territories. Zuri led her reduced clan with the same intelligence as always. But she learned something that night. She learned that some places, some groups, cost more than their worth, that sometimes the predator meets something that predates back. 3 months later, a group of veterinarians arrived at Loita Hills. They came from an international organization that had heard the story. They brought vaccines, anti-parasitic treatments, vitamins, all free, for the 10 DOGO Argentinos that had defended the village, and for any other dog in the region needing care. They said they did it because these dogs deserved to be honored, that what they'd done was exceptional. Daniel accepted treatment for his dogs, but rejected any award or special recognition. These aren't exceptional dogs, he said. They're dogs that did what all dogs would do if given the opportunity, protect who they love. 1 year later, on a quiet night without rain, Daniel sat on his porch with the 10 dogos at his feet. He looked at the stars finally visible after weeks of clear skies, and he thought about that night, about how he'd been sure they would die, about how math said it was impossible, 60 against 10. But math can't measure loyalty. It can't quantify the bond between human and dog. It can't calculate the value of community, of solidarity, of absolute certainty that there are things worth dying for. Truno put his head in Daniel's lap. The man stroked the scar on the dog's chest, the one from the leopard. Now there were new scars beside it, 17 to be exact, each one a medal, each one a story, and Daniel whispered something he'd wanted to say for months but never found the words. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to stay when you could have run. Thank you for fighting when it would have been safer to hide. Thank you for showing me that loyalty isn't just a word. It's a choice made every day. Trueno looked at him, and if dogs could speak, Daniel knew he would have said, "There's nothing to thank. You saved us first. You gave us home when we had none. You gave us purpose when we were lost. This was just returning what you'd already given us." The village of Loita Hills prospered after that night. Families stayed, children grew, goats multiplied, and every year, on the anniversary of the battle, they had a celebration. They didn't celebrate violence. They celebrated survival, community, the reminder that when you face the impossible, when numbers say you'll lose, when darkness seems overwhelming, sometimes all you need is enough loyalty to change the equation. Sometimes all you need are 10 hearts willing to beat as one. And on rainy nights, when the sound of water hitting roofs made some remember that night, the village children approached the 10 white dogos and lay down beside them. And the dogs, these warriors who had faced 60 predators and survived, stayed absolutely still, allowing children to use their bodies as pillows, because they understood something humans sometimes forget. That strength isn't just for destroying, it's for protecting, that fangs that can kill can also guard. That the same dog that fights to death against 60 hyenas in darkness is the same dog that sleeps with infinite patience while a 3-year-old pulls his ear. Nature doesn't reward the strongest. It rewards those who adapt, who learn, who understand that sometimes survival isn't just about you, it's about everyone. The 10 DOGO Argentinos who defended Loita Hills that rainy night weren't stronger than 60 hyenas. They weren't bigger. They weren't more numerous. But they had something the hyenas didn't have. They had reason. They had purpose. They had love for something bigger than themselves. And when you have that, when you truly have it, numbers stop mattering. Odds become irrelevant. Because you're fighting not just with muscle and fang, you're fighting with will, with absolute certainty that you'd rather die standing protecting what you love than live on your knees watching it destroyed. And that certainty, that choice, that conscious decision to say, here I stay, here I fight, here I die if necessary, but I don't retreat, that's what turns impossible into possible. That's what makes 10 dogs able to face 60 hyenas and survive. That's what makes a small village in the middle of the savannah, isolated by storm, without communication, without reinforcements, able to resist the darkest night and see dawn on the other side. And when that dawn finally came, when the rain stopped and the sun touched the savannah, Daniel Correa left his house and saw the 10 dogos lying in the dry mud, exhausted, wounded, but alive. And in that moment, in that golden morning light that turned their white coats to pure gold, he understood something he'd never forget, that he'd witnessed something rare, something most people never see in their entire lives. He'd seen loyalty in its purest form, love in its most brutal expression. He'd seen the exact moment when a group of individual animals stops being a collection and becomes something more: family, brotherhood, a force that transcends biology and enters the territory of legendary. And as the sun kept rising, painting the sky with reds and oranges that looked like blood and fire, the 10 dogos got up one by one. And without anyone ordering them, without anyone calling them, they walked to the village perimeter and began to patrol. As if saying, the night passed, but our vigilance doesn't end. Because that's what we do, because that's what we are, because we don't know how to be anything other than guardians of what we love.